Welcome, everyone, to Yevamot, 1 week at a time. This is our 13th lesson, and as some have said, thank you all for hanging in there. We are in our 13th lesson, and today we are going to be reviewing Daf 86 to 92. I apologize in advance, my voice is a little sore, but I will try to be as clear as possible. Um, we are going to be finishing the 9th chapter and then beginning the 10th chapter of Yevamot. And if you have looked at our schedule, the end is near. So I imagine you're all excited for that, the finale, the siyum. But let's go to Daf 86. We're actually going to start on Daf 85 at the Mishnah on the bottom of the page. And now we're going to discuss. We've seen previously that the Kohen, the priest, eats truma. Truma is the sanctified food that was given as a gift from the Jewish people to the priests. And we'll see only the priests can eat it and their family. And maaser, which is given to the Levi, to the Levites. So the Mishnah tells us on the bottom of 85 that a Jewish woman, a Bat Yisrael, meaning she's not a Levi or a Kohen, if she's engaged to a Kohen, meaning not married, or if a woman is pregnant from a Kohen and then he died, meaning before she gave birth or they're divorced, or if it's a woman who's waiting to do Yibum with a Kohen, all of these things, sorry, a man who's a Yisrael, but a woman who is a Bat Kohen, meaning the daughter of a Kohen, all of these people cannot eat Truma. So again, just to review, if a Kohen marries a woman from Levi or from Yisrael, once they get married, she can eat Truma. Our Mishnah discusses where they're not yet married. So again, either they're engaged or she's waiting to do Yibum, so she cannot yet eat Truma. The same case applies for a Levi, right? If a woman is engaged to a Levi, she cannot eat Maaser. This is Maaser Rishon, the first tithing, which is meant for the Levi. And if we have the same scenario, but it's a Kohen with the daughter of a Levi, so now she can't eat Truma as a Kohen because she's not married to him yet, and she can't eat Maser anymore because she's already betrothed to the Kohen. So that's our Mishnah. The Gemara tells us on Daf 86 that it seems that there is an opinion that Maser, which again is meant for the Levi, can also be eaten by the priest because it's also called a Truma. And therefore, Maser can be eaten by the Levi um, or by the Kohen. The Gemara seems to reinterpret the Mishnah and says when it says that she can't eat Truma, it really means that she can't separate the Truma from her husband's Maser, meaning she can't control her husband's produce because, again, as we mentioned, she's not yet married. When she's married, she can control what happens to the produce, but while she's engaged, she cannot have that control. Or another interpretation is it means that she can't go down to the granary to get his portion. Again, when she's married, she might be able to, but now that she's only engaged or waiting to do Yibum, so then she cannot do it, right? Maybe because it's inappropriate for her, or maybe it's because, again, she's not yet or she's divorced from this man, and therefore we're afraid that she's going to take something that doesn't really belong to her. Um, Okay. The Gemara now says, as we mentioned, Truma is given to the Kohen, Ma'aser, right, the tithing is given to the Levi. Or, as I mentioned previously, Maaser can also be given to the Kohen, not only to the Levi. Um, so there's a story of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, um, he's the one who said that Kohanim can eat Maaser, and he actually went down to collect Maaser, and then Rabbi Akiva changed the entranceway. It seems he was a Kohen, and Rabbi Akiva changed the entranceway to the granary so that it actually went through a cemetery so that he couldn't go and get it. And it's just a very interesting story. Um, the Gemara continues and tells us that Ezra, who is the leader of the people during the return to Zion, the Shivat Zion, this is after the 70 years of exile in Babylonia. Ezra brought the people back to Israel, and he penalized the Leviim, the Levites, from getting Maaser. Because the Gemara explains that a lot of the Levi'im did not make Aliyah, they did not move to Israel when everybody else did, and therefore Ezra decided to say that the priests can also eat Maaser, and he wanted to make sure, or another reason was he wanted to make sure that the priests would have something to eat when they would become impure, because when they were impure, they couldn't eat the Teruma, and therefore he wanted to make sure that they had something to eat. And the Gemara says, no, really, the answer is the first reason. It's a penalty for the Levi'im who did not come and return to Israel. The next Mishnah on Daf 86 tells us that if a Yisrael woman marries a priest, a Kohen, she can then eat Truma, as we mentioned before. And if he dies and she has a son from him, she can continue eating Truma, meaning she eats Truma because of her son, who's also a priest. Now, if she now goes and marries a Levi, so now the same woman, so now she can eat Maaser because of the Levi, but she stops being able to eat Truma. Now, if he dies, of course, the Mishnah is going to get a little complicated. If the Levi dies and she has a son from him, she continues to eat Maaser. Then, I guess it's a very busy woman, she goes and marries a Yisrael. Now she can't eat Truma or Maaser. But if the Yisrael dies and she has a son from the Yisrael, she continues to not eat either. But if her Yisrael son dies, now she goes back to her status of having a Levi son, and she can eat Maaser. If the Levi son dies, she can go back to eating Truma because of her Kohen son. And if the Kohen son dies, then she can't eat either once again. The Gemara says the Mishnah has the same case, but flipped, right? A Bat Kohen, meaning a female Kohen, she was able to eat Truma in her father's house. If she marries a Yisrael, she can't eat Truma. And then if he dies and she has a son, she still cannot eat Truma. Then, now we're at the top of 87. If she marries a Levi, she can eat Maaser. If he dies and she has a son, she continues to eat Maaser. If she marries a Kohen, she can eat Truma. And if he dies and she still has a son, she can eat Truma. And then we're going to go backwards, right? If the Kohen son dies, she goes back to eating Maaser. If the Levi son dies, she can't eat either Maaser or Truma. And if the Yisrael son dies, meaning she goes back to no children, she can go back to her father's house and eat Truma. Because if you remember, she was originally a Kohen from the priest's family. So the Gemara says that this is all based on a verse that says that she can go back to eating Truma because of her son. Again, if a woman is married to a Kohen, he gives her the ability to eat Truma. And if he dies and she has a child, she continues eating Truma. When the bat kohen, meaning when the female kohen returns to her father's house, she can eat truma, but she cannot eat in Hebrew it's called the chazeh and the shuk. These are parts of meat of the animal that were given as gifts to the priests. So she can eat truma, but she cannot eat these sanctified meats. Um, and her father cannot nullify her vows, meaning she goes back to his house, but it's not as if she never left. A woman who has a Kohen's son, as we said, can eat truma, and she can eat those sanctified meats, the chazeh and the shok, the thigh and the chest, the breast area. Um, and a woman who's waiting to do yibum, or a pregnant woman. Um, so if she's a bat kohen, she does not return to her father's house. Meaning, the only way she can return to her father's house if she does not have children. Um, you might think that if the child dies after the father, then she then she needs to do yibum. And we say no, right? Meaning, again, we're going to construct a case where the, she had a child, the father died, the husband died. At the moment that he died, she had a child. Therefore, even if the child does die later on, she doesn't need to go back and do yibum. And the reason is because we're concerned that maybe she'll marry somebody else and get in trouble, meaning she'll get messed up. Um, and maybe, right, maybe a child from an earlier marriage for Yibum can affect the second husband. And the Gemara again says no, that is not the case. And with that, we finish the 9th chapter. We're going to begin the 10th chapter. And I'm just going to put out there that it's a challenging chapter. The topic is challenging. The cases that we're going to learn about are challenging, and I do not have answers. I think that it is important to discuss these cases, and I think that again we're going to be learning the concept of an aguna. Aguna literally means chained, and it basically refers to a woman who is chained to her husband, meaning it is difficult. We'll see what the case is in a minute, but it's difficult for her to divorce her first husband, and therefore she is prevented from remarrying or marrying a second time. And as I mentioned, these are challenging cases, which I'm happy to discuss as we go along. So the Mishnah on Daf 87 tells us the case is that a husband went overseas, and then somebody comes and says, "Your husband died." That is the testimony. And then she went and she married somebody else, and then her husband comes back. So the Mishnah tells us that she needs to leave both husbands, meaning she needs to leave the second husband because it seems that she was never allowed to marry him in the first place, and she needs to leave the first husband because it's seen as adultery, meaning the fact that she slept with the second man is seen as adultery, and therefore she cannot go back to the original husband. The Mishnah continues and tells us that she needs a get, a bill of divorce from both of them, and she doesn't get her Ketuva, her money that she was supposed to get when she gets divorced. She doesn't get the money that she came in with into the wedding. She doesn't get supported by either of these husbands, and this is from both of them. And if she takes anything from either husband, she needs to return them. And the child is a mamzer. If she had a child from the second husband, the child is a mamzer. And if she goes back to the first husband, even though she's not allowed to, and has a child with him, that child is also a mamzer, right? Meaning illegitimate, or again, a mamzer. Um, and basically, they don't have any rights from her, and she doesn't have any rights from them. And we'll go through all of these cases. Um, Now, if she's a Bat Yisrael, again, a regular Israelite woman, she now can't marry a Kohen. She's seen as invalid to marry a priest. If she was the daughter of a Levi, she cannot eat Maser. And if she's the daughter of a priest, she cannot eat Truma. And his children don't inherit her estate. Um, and their brothers do chalitza, but they cannot do yibum. Um, or there's another opinion in the Mishnah that says that she does get a ketuva from, meaning she does have rights from the first husband, and he has rights to her property. Or maybe she's even seen as fully married to the first husband, and she can do yibum or chalitza if he dies. And the child from the first husband is not a mamzer, but this is not the halacha. Um, the Mishnah continues, if she married without permission of the court, and again, we're going to explain all of these cases, she can fully return to the first husband. But if she had permission, then she has to divorce both. But she does not have to bring a sacrifice for adultery, meaning it's not seen as adultery. If she married without permission of the court, then she has to leave the second husband, and she has to bring a sacrifice for adultery. If the court gave her permission to get married, and then instead of getting married, she just has an affair or she sleeps with someone, and then the husband comes back, so again, she has to bring a sacrifice as well. Okay, that's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara tells us the first case, when we said she got married with permission or without permission. So the Gemara explains that the first case is that she got married. Again, the beginning of the Mishnah is that she got married when only one witness came and told her that her husband died. In general, we need two witnesses to come, exactly. Two witnesses. However, we're going to see that the rabbis did not want to create this very difficult, challenging scenario, and therefore the rabbis allowed one witness to say that we saw the husband die or get killed, and therefore allowing her to get married again. But it's problematic because if it's one witness and now two witnesses come and say, what are you talking about? We saw this guy walking down the street in Madrid. So then she's really in trouble. So the Gemara says, first, it's important to understand that in this case, one witness is believed, and even a woman, right? When we say that one woman is believed, that person can even be a woman as well in general, and we'll learn it another time. Women are in general not seen as valid witnesses, but in this case they are. Meaning, again, we want to make sure that this woman is able to marry, and therefore a woman is also accepted as as the witness. This is all based on a verse. And therefore, it is biblical in origin that one witness is okay. Daf 88 tells us that, again, maybe the reason that the person is believed is because maybe the other person doesn't say anything, and being silent, according to Jewish law, is as if you are agreeing with that person. Or maybe the case is where we aren't sure what happened, and then one witness comes, and that person knows for sure that the person died, so then they're believed, right? Meaning they're sure that this happened. Another concept here that the Gemara brings up is that in general, um, when we're talking about prohibited relationships, you cannot have less than two witnesses. But again, as we said, in our case, we allow one witness to bring testimony because, again, we're trying to change the status of the person, and therefore it would be okay. Or, as I mentioned before, the sages really did not want this woman to be an aguna, to be chained to the first husband, and therefore we accept one witness. Okay. If she got remarried with permission from the court, so we have to understand what that means. She doesn't have to get divorced if the first husband comes back, only if we don't recognize him. And here the Gemara brings up a very interesting idea that two witnesses come, or the husband comes back and says, like, "Hi, honey, I'm home," and she says, "I don't know who you are." Right? She doesn't recognize him. I don't know. He changed. I don't know. His appearance is different, and therefore, the Gemara says that if um, if she doesn't recognize him, then maybe that's enough that she does not have to get divorced from the first husband, and she can maybe stay with the second husband. And the Gemara brings the case of Joseph, right? When Joseph sees the brothers in Egypt, he recognizes them because the Gemara says when he left, they all had beards, and they still had beards. But they didn't recognize him because when he left, he was a young man, right? He was 17. I guess he didn't have a beard yet. But now when they came to see him, he was older, and therefore they didn't recognize him because he was fully grown. Or maybe the case is that if her second husband, here the Gemara adds an interesting case. Maybe it's that the second husband is one of the witnesses who said that number one husband died. That's a little, interesting. She marries one of the witnesses, and maybe that's the case. Now the Gemara says, if it's two witnesses that came and told her that the husband died, and then another two witnesses come, so then that's, again, the Gemara will see it as two against two, and then I don't know which one to listen to, right? Maybe we accept the first witnesses and not necessarily the second witnesses. But if she does get remarried with this case, she doesn't need to get divorced. Or maybe if she got remarried after the witnesses came and said that he isn't dead, then she does need to get divorced. But if she got married before they came, she can stay married. What if one of the witnesses is a priest and then she marries one of the witnesses, even if she's certain that her husband died? The court will force him to divorce her because, again, we're being very stringent for priests. Or maybe they find other witnesses to prove that he's still alive. Or, says the Gemara, we change the case. Maybe she doesn't have to divorce the first husband at all. Or, actually, there's a dispute. If the man is the first husband, one second. Sorry. If there's a dispute on if the man is really the first husband, meaning we don't really recognize him, right? This sounds like a soap opera, right? Everyone thinks the person is dead, but really they come back and it's a new actor and, you don't recognize him, right? So if it's someone you don't recognize, so then she can stay with the second husband. And interestingly, the Gemara says that if two women testify, that can trump one man in this case, or maybe it's seen as equal, and therefore we believe the first witnesses, either one or two, and not the second witnesses. Let's say she got married on the basis of one witness, then she does need a get from both husbands, even the second. Now the question is, why would she need a get from the second husband if it's not really a marriage? Because again, she wasn't really a widow. So the Gemara explains that even though it's not a real marriage, she needs a get so that people don't think that you can just walk away from any marriage. Um, and okay, Daf 89 tells us that really the reason that she needs a get is that it's a penalty for relying on only one witness. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but at this point, the Gemara wants to make sure that if the woman wants to get remarried, she is going to do all the research that she can in order to find out if the man is alive or not. And a woman in my group of Daf Yomi mentioned that there's this book out of cases like this from 9/11, where unfortunately people there were men who were killed, and unfortunately the bodies were never found. And the question is, what happens to the wife? And the rabbis looked and researched very hard to make sure that maybe, right, there wasn't any chance that maybe the husband used this as an excuse to run away to another country. But again, because they couldn't prove anything, and they actually did all the research to allow, I think she said it was either 3 or 4 women had this case, and they allowed them to get remarried. So I'll just say that as much as I think that the problem of Aguna is a very big problem nowadays, of again, not in this exact not in cases like this that we just mentioned, but more in cases of men who refuse to give get to their women, to their wives. But I do have to say that in this case, like 9/11, and here we see a little bit in the Gemara, the sages are trying to allow these women to remarry, but they do want to make sure that everybody is doing as much research as they could in order to ascertain if the husband is in fact dead. Let's continue on Daf 89. It says that she doesn't get a so we said all these penalties. She doesn't get a ketuva. She doesn't get supported. So it sounds a little harsh. So the Gemara says that she doesn't get a ketuva because we want it to be easy for him to divorce her. Again, we want them to get divorced because this marriage was not a valid marriage, and therefore she doesn't get produce and she doesn't get supported. All of these are part of her ketuva, and therefore we do want to penalize her so that they actually do get divorced. Okay, excuse me. 1 second. Okay, from here the Gemara now talks about separating truma for, if let's say you have a truma that is impure, can you separate it for truma that is pure? If you do it bishogig, meaning inadvertently, it works. But if you do it on purpose, then it doesn't work. We're going to see the connection to this in a minute. There are other cases that don't work with truma, meaning if you separated spoiled food for good food, or for plants that grew in a pot without a hole for things that grew in the ground. So again, all of these biblically do work, but it's just not good, and therefore, according to the rabbis, you shouldn't do this. And here now the Gemara asks, how can the rabbis say that something that is biblically truma, how could they say that it's not truma? Meaning it seems that they are uprooting something that, according to biblical law, is one thing, and they're changing it to be something else. And it seems that it's similar to our Mishnah, right? How could the Mishnah tell us that the child is a mamzer from the first husband, when biblically the child from the first husband is not a mamzer, right? How could the sages have the right to make this change in status? And the Gemara says, right, really, the child is not a mamzer. and therefore it's not really making it a mamzer. Um, but again, the Gemara wants to try to penalize this couple so that they don't get married in the first place. And we have a similar case, right? If a man marries a minor, so the Gemara asks, when does he inherit her? Meaning, we learned that a girl who was an orphan and her brother marries her off to a man. Uh, till she's 12, she has the right to say, right, it was called, she can do miyun, and she can say she does not want to be married to this man. So the question is, if let's say she dies, when can he inherit her? Meaning, when does she become a full-fledged spouse? Right, so some say from age 12, right, when she becomes 12, so then the second she turns 12, she automatically becomes a full-fledged wife. Others say till they do chuppah, meaning they have to have a new wedding ceremony, or till they actually have relations after that wedding ceremony. Right, until then, her father's relatives inherit her, again, biblically. So, how could the court say that it belongs to the husband? Again, another case where the court seems to be uprooting a biblical status and making it something else according to them. So the Gemara says, no, the court, the Beit Din, does have the right to allocate money where they see fit. And therefore, when she dies, the Beit Din, the court, can decide that he inherits her and not her father's inheritors. Okay. Okay, Daf 90 tells us again, if a non-Kohen eats truma that is impure, he needs to pay back the priest with food that is pure, right? Regular food that is pure. Or no, if he ate impure truma, he can pay back with impure food. But if he ate pure truma, so then he needs to pay back pure food as well. So again, if he switches this, he's penalized. But again, this doesn't. The Gemara says that this doesn't prove if the court can uproot a biblical law. We're going to try again. What if impure blood was sprinkled onto the altar? Right? In general, that's not okay. But if you do it inadvertently, so if you remember the tzitz, the headband of the Kohen Gadol, makes it okay. But if you do it on purpose, b'mezid, then it's not okay. But again, the Gemara says, but really, biblically, it is okay. So how could the sages say it's not okay? The Gemara says, no, really, the rabbis are telling him, don't do anything, right? And it's called in Hebrew, shev ve'al ta'aseh. They'd rather you do nothing. But here with our truma case, it's not shev ve'al ta'aseh. It's not doing anything. You still have to pay back. And therefore, the court doesn't want you to do this. And therefore, the Gemara does say that at times the sages will say, I'd rather you don't do anything as opposed to uprooting and telling you to do something actively, right? They'd rather you be passive than active in terms of transgressing. If a convert converts on Erev Pesach, on the day that you need to bring the Pesach sacrifice, when he does conversion, we said that he becomes impure. But really, it's only the sages that don't let him eat the korban. Really, he could have eaten the sacrifice. So why is that? So the Gemara says, no. Here, they want to make sure that if we let him eat from the sacrifice this year, maybe next year he'll be impure for a different reason and say, "Oh, last year I was impure and I got to eat it, so this year I could be impure and eat it as well." Um, and again, the Gemara brings various other situations of things that really biblically you could do, but the sages wanted to create these fences and didn't let you do them, right? So you can't bring a knife on Shabbat to do circumcision if there's no Eruv, or other, right, sprinkling the blood on the altar on Shabbos, blowing shofar, lulav on Shabbat, right? All these things really biblically they're okay, but the sages wanted to protect us, and therefore said that it was not okay to do. The Gemara tells us that true prophets, the people needed to listen to them, even if he tells you to go against the Torah, like Eliyahu Hanavi, right? Like Elijah, who told them to do a sacrifice outside of the temple. And the Torah tells us that the prophet can do this, but again, this is not the sages, and this is not a proof either. We said that you can't nullify. Another case is where, let's say, a husband sends a get to his wife via a messenger. So he cannot nullify the get that he sent his wife. But if he does, it works biblically. But rabbinically, we say it does not work. Again, it seems that this is not a proof, because when he gets married, he does so with the approval of the court. And therefore, the court, right, we say, Kedat Moshe v'Yisrael, right? We accept upon ourselves the betrothal and the marriage in the law of Israel, and therefore that gives the court system the ability to uproot that law. The Gemara tells us at the bottom of 90 that the court can punish even if it's something that is not written in the Torah, to create offense. But again, this seems to not be a proof. And then we say that, okay, so now let's go back to our case from the Mishnah, that if this woman finds something, she doesn't have to give it to the first husband or to the second husband. This could cause hate between them. And again, the Gemara says, great, hate is great, because we don't want you to, it's not great. But in this case, we want them to get divorced, and therefore we're not trying to save their marriage. And therefore her salary doesn't go to them, because she's not being supported to them, and they cannot annul her vows. Daf 91, she's not allowed to marry a Kohen afterwards, and the daughter of a Levi cannot eat Maser after this relationship, and this is all a penalty for her. Again, you might ask, why is she being penalized? And I think the answer is, we want to make sure that she's not jumping into the relationship. It's important to understand that there's a concept in the Gemara, which is that women, and again, I think that this is pretty obvious in the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara, and probably even 100 or 200 years ago, the concept is that the woman is always seeking to get married, meaning the woman does not want to be single, and she's going to do everything in her power to be married, because that involves support, and she does not want to remain single. And I think that with that assumption, the Gemara is therefore saying that we're concerned that she's going to jump too quickly to get remarried. And we want to make sure that she recognizes that there are consequences to if she gets married without confirming that her husband is dead. So again, I think these penalties feel very harsh, but I think they're there to prevent her from rushing into this relationship. We said that the children do not inherit her Ketuva. And then the Gemara says, what are you talking about? We just said that there is no Ketuva. And here there's a new concept. The concept is called Ketuva Banin Dichrin, which really means the Ketuva of the male sons. This was a line in the Ketuva, or a contract, that said that her children, her male sons, will inherit her if if the event that she dies, they inherit her estate or her property. So the Gemara says that she even loses this in this case. You might think that we don't penalize the children, but unfortunately we do here. Then we said that the brother of the first husband does chalitza, and really, deoraita, right? Again, deoraita, he does chalitza, and he cannot do yibum according to the sages. The brother of the second husband does chalitza according to rabbinic law, but cannot do yibum at all. And here the Gemara says that there's a machloket if we penalize her in monetary issues and also in relationship, meaning for yibum. Again, as we mentioned, we want to discourage them from staying married, and therefore we have all of these penalties. We mentioned that she gets married without permission. So the Gemara wants to understand, what does this mean without permission? It means that she got married, that two witnesses came, therefore she didn't have to go to court, and she just went and got married. She can go back to the first husband. If she got married with permission from the court, meaning based on one witness plus the court, then she cannot go back to the first husband. So then the Gemara raises the point that, wait a minute, it's not her fault. Like, this whole thing is not her fault. So why is she being penalized? Which I think is something that we're all thinking about. We're going to get back to that case in a minute. But first, the Gemara says that in any forbidden relationship, arayot, in any forbidden relationship, you do not need a get, because we don't see you as being married, right? If a man wants to marry his sister, that doesn't work according to Jewish law. So even if they get officially married, they don't have to get divorced because it's not seen as a marriage, except for eshet ish, meaning if a married woman marries a man, again, with permission from the court, so then she does need a get. But there's a braita that says that she doesn't need a get. So how do we understand this? The Gemara interprets it in different ways, and basically it depends what happens when the court gave her permission or not, right? And that's what the Gemara is going to explain. But again, as we mentioned, what did you want her to do, right? Witnesses came, the court says it's okay, so why is she being penalized? Like, what do you want her to do? So now the Gemara is going to give several cases of, we might have thought we could say, what did you want her to do? But the Gemara answers, no, I'll tell you what I wanted her to do. We don't necessarily have an answer for that for our case, even though I think that the answer is we want her to really, really make sure that the husband is dead. But first, let's do the different cases, right? So basically, if they write a get with the wrong date, right? It's the wrong king's date, or basically it's invalid. And if she goes and she marries another man afterwards, she needs to divorce both husbands. And the Gemara says, but wait a minute, what did you want her to do? So the Gemara says, well, she should have read the get. Meaning, if you're going to get divorced, you better make sure you know what it says on the get. The next example is, right, again, there are a few more examples, and all of them you would say, like, what did you want her to do? And the Gemara basically answers, right, let's say a woman, right, there are two wives, the husband dies, and then let's say the woman one wife does yibum, and the other wife goes out and marries someone else, and it turns out that the woman who did Yibum is an Ilonit, meaning she will not go through puberty. Therefore, she wasn't allowed to do Yibum in the first place. Therefore, the other wife needs to now get divorced because she needed to do Yibum. And again, the Gemara says, well, what should she have done? The Gemara says you should have waited, right? And there are a few other cases where there were wrong dates in the get, or it was given to the wrong person. But the bottom line is, the Gemara says, you have to be very careful in all of these instances. You need to read your get. You need to make sure that it was signed. And if you didn't, there are consequences. Daf 92 tells us that you do not have to pay attention to rumors if there are rumors that her husband is still alive, right? When we talked about the beginning of the perek, we said that the issue is that the husband comes back. So that's one thing. But if there's only a rumor, oh, we heard maybe there was a sighting of the husband, that we don't listen to. That we don't listen to the rumor. Then we discussed the idea of if she needs to bring a sacrifice or not. And here we have a discussion on what happens when a court makes a faulty ruling. So the Gemara makes a distinction. There is a faulty ruling, a psak. Ruling means that they analyzed data and they came to a decision. The other option is something called a ta'ut, meaning they made a mistake. There was a fact, but it turns out that that fact was not true, and that was their mistake. Right? So if they declared that there was a fact, right, that the sun set, but really the sun didn't set, so then the people need to bring a sacrifice in that case because they misspoke, meaning it was the wrong fact. But if the Gemara analyzes something, if the court analyzes something and comes to a conclusion, if the people act on that analysis, they do not need to bring a sacrifice because they're relying on the analysis of the court system. So now the question is, when we're talking about giving permission to the woman to remarry, is this a psak? Did they make a ruling? Or are they just declaring fact? Meaning the husband died, the husband didn't die, right? And it's actually a machloket, right? Some say that it's a fact, and therefore if it's a fact and then they were wrong, the person needs to bring a korban, a sacrifice. Or maybe no, it's a psak, and therefore the woman does not need to bring a sacrifice. And again, as I mentioned, the Gemara wants to make sure that you really analyze if she can marry the second husband. And if the first husband comes back, she does need to bring a sacrifice, right? And that seems to prove that this was actually a fault in the facts and not fault in analysis. And as we mentioned before, if she sleeps with someone after the Beit Din said that she can get married, meaning not to get married, but she sleeps with someone, then she has to bring a korban because that's not what they let her do. Or if she marries a kohen, right? Let's say, right, they said that she was a widow, and then she went and married the wrong person. She marries a priest, then she still needs to bring a sacrifice. And if she marries 5 people, she needs to bring 5 sacrifices. Okay, the last Mishnah for today. If a husband and the child went overseas and now they come back and they say the husband died first, right? So if the husband dies first, that means that he died when she had a child. Therefore, she does not have to do Yibum and she can marry somebody else. And then she remarries and then they say, oops, we made a mistake. Really, the son died first. And now she really needed to do Yibum, so she needs to divorce the new husband. And the children of that relationship are actually mamzerim, which is very strong. What about the flip case? If they say that the son died first, and then she goes and she does Yibum, right? She's doing everything she's supposed to do. And then they say, oh no, really the husband died first and you weren't allowed to do Yibum. So then she needs to divorce the man, the Yavam, and the children are Mamzerim. Again, like very difficult. Let's say the husband dies and then she gets married and really he was alive. And then only now he's dead, right? So again, her first child from that new relationship is a Mamzer, but afterwards, meaning after the husband was really dead, so then the child is okay. What if the husband died and then she became betrothed to someone and then he shows up, he comes back? She can return to that husband because she only got betrothed, she didn't get married. And even though the second one gave her a get, she can even marry a priest, a Kohen. Okay, so that was the Mishnah. The Gemara says that our Mishnah seems to be like Rabbi Akiva. If you remember, previously we learned that Rabbi Akiva is very stringent in creating a child that's a mamzer, right? He says a mamzer even comes from a negative prohibition. The rabbis and the way we hold is a mamzer only comes when it's a more severe punishment, which is a karet. But he holds even from a lav, and therefore the child from the yibum, which he wasn't supposed to do, according to Rabbi Akiva, is a mamzer. But the sages say he is not. The child is not a mamzer. Okay, if the yavam, um, sorry, one second. If the yavam was a kohen, right? Again, so then the kohen should do chalitza, and then um, okay. The Kohen should do chalitza, and then she can stay with the second husband, right? Or the Gemara says no, that she shouldn't have been married to that second husband, and therefore, rather, if the Yavam is a Yisrael, then the husband should divorce her, and then she can do Yibum with the original brother. As we mentioned, right, Kedushin doesn't work with her, but marriage does, and therefore she does need a get, or neither work, and therefore she does not need a get. And therefore, again, we said, no, really she still needs a get from both people, because as we mentioned, we don't want people to get confused and think that that you do not need a get when you leave a husband. With that, I'm going to wish you all a wonderful week. And I'm really thank you all so much for sticking through this very challenging Masechet. And really, I think if you can do Yevamot, you can do anything. I will just make an announcement. Next week's class, next week's class is going to be on Sunday night at this time, right? So 9 p.m. Israel time, Sunday night. But then the week after, we'll go back to Tuesdays.
Okay.
So thank you all, and
Mhm.
I hope it was semi understandable. And really wishing everybody, I hope everyone had a wonderful Shavuot. I hope
Yeah,
you
it was
felt
wonderful.
connected to the Torah, and may we merit to study together for many weeks to come. So
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank
thank
you.
you, everyone, and feel good. And see you all
You too. You
ne-
too.
thank you, thank you. See you all next Sunday.
Okay, Sunday. Bye bye.